Giant head in the Aegean. A team of European archaeologists and divers found a giant marble head during an underwater expedition at the site of the Antiquity shipwreck in the Aegean Sea. Researchers have identified the head as a Heracles of the Phanes type. According to them, it may belong to a headless statue of a demigod, which was found in the same place in 1900 during a shipwreck. The statue is currently kept in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. 2 human teeth were also found embedded in a hard agglomerate with traces of copper, genetic material that could be analyzed to determine the sex of the person they belonged to. The researchers also found several other artifacts belonging to the ship, such as bronze, iron, and nails, but these can only be identified using X-rays. All items were handed over for conservation to the Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities of Greece. Early Iron Age swords. The swords were discovered during the construction of a new fire station in the Bavarian city of Andex. These items were funerary. Each sword was buried in a separate grave along with the remains. Swords represent an important transitional stage from the use of bronze to the use of iron in weapons. Both are made of iron, but the earlier one was made in the shape and style of a Bronze Age sword. The later one, made in the same period, had an adapted design to take advantage of the stronger and more stable metal. The swords are 76 and 66 centimeters long and 6 centimeters wide. While the shorter one was probably mainly used as a stabbing weapon in hand-to-hand combat, the longer and heavier one was more suitable as a stabbing weapon that a fighter could wield from above, for example from a horse. At the Bavarian State Heritage Office in Munich, a team of restorers cleaned the swords using microfine shot blasting technology and examined them more closely. The restorers managed to find traces of a horn on one of the so-called hiltons, and the hilt was probably made from this material. 2 blades also contained the remains of a layered linen weave fabric, as well as the remains of a cord that must have been wrapped around it in several places. Presumably, the weapons were wrapped in cloth and buried. The oldest traces of human life in the Arctic. Modern humans lived in the Arctic 40,000 years ago at the beginning of the late Paleolithic. This was found out by examining the bone remains of animals found in the archaeological complex in the Lower Ob. It is believed that a man of the modern type ended up in Europe and Asia 50–60,000 years ago, but scientists do not know where he lived before and how he passed the Ural Range. For a long time, it was believed that in the period 12–30,000 years ago, the north of western Siberia was covered by a glacier, and therefore it is pointless to look for archaeological traces in this region. In 2020, at the Krushevets site, in the deposits of an ancient stream, a cultural horizon full of bones was discovered, stretching for tens of meters. The stream existed for 20–40,000 years, now it has shifted down several meters. There are interesting finds that archaeologists periodically date. In particular, 2 deer antlers with traces of processing were found. This is the first discovery in this region, indicating the presence of men in this area 40,000 years ago. To determine the age of the finds, scientists use the method of accelerator mass spectrometry. This is an ultra-sensitive method of isotopic analysis in which a careful selection of the atoms of a substance is carried out with isotope counting. It allows you to date organic objects with an accuracy of up to 50 years. This work will allow us to understand the migration routes of people in the Paleolithic era and find out how people settled on the Earth. The complex language of communication in chimpanzees. Chimpanzees use a fairly rich language to communicate, the words of which they are able to combine into sentences. Experts from the Max Planck University of Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany found out. The researchers analyzed almost 5,000 conversation recordings, totaling about 900 hours, between adult chimpanzees in the Taï National Park in Côte d'Ivoire. They were able to isolate 390 unique vocal sequences. Although it was obvious before that the sounds made by chimpanzees carry certain information, such a wide range of vocalizations came as a surprise to scientists. Vocalizations were both single and combined into chains of several and combined in different ways. In total, scientists have identified 12 different types of vocalizations, including grunts, lowing, and whining. The use of vocalizations was influenced by the context. For example, a single grunt of a chimpanzee was published at the side of food, and a series of grunts more like a pant as a sign of a submissive greeting. Although the chimpanzee language is poorer than the human language, it turned out to be much richer and more diverse than previously thought. There are probably more possible combinations and sounds in it than we have been able to identify. Scientists hope that further research into the language of monkeys will help to learn more about the origin of language in humans. Prehistoric Swiss knife. South African archaeologists have found that mid-Stone Age African howison sport-type tools, which are functionally very similar to Swiss army knives, looked almost the same over vast expanses. This indicates that early humans actively exchanged information and communicated with each other. The tools of the howison sport industry were produced in huge quantities over 5 millennia and were very perfect for their time. At a later time, there was a degradation of technology, and after some time, a new take-off. The blades made 60,000 years ago were in many respects superior to the stone tools of the late Stone Age, which came only 25,000 years later. Numerous highly versatile blades have been used for many different purposes, including the use as hunting tools, hand-thrown spears, and possibly also a bow and arrow, felling trees and branches, meat, bones, leather dressing, etc. At the same time, all the blades looked very similar and were made according to a uniform pattern throughout the south of the African continent. All this indicates that people of that time must have actively shared the secrets of their manufacture and other information with each other. That is, they were all then socially connected. Boar's jaw on the chest. The Skull grotto is now in Israel. For centuries, shepherds kept goats in this grotto. Excavations began in 1928, and 3 years later, archaeologists found in the layers of the terrace in front of the grotto the skeletons of 10 ancient people, as well as more than 10,000 stone tools belonging to the Middle Paleolithic. The culture is similar to the Neanderthal. 8 male skeletons, 2 presumably female. All but one of the skeletons had bent legs. Intentional burials are suspected, although grave pits are not traceable. One of the iconic finds is 2 drilled shells, one of the oldest jewelry in the world. On the chest of the skeleton of Skull 5, between the arms, lay the lower jaw of a large boar. Sometimes they mistakenly write that it is clamped in the hand. Skeletons combine progressive archaic features. At various times, they were identified as Neanderthals, or as mestizos of Neanderthals with sapiens, now usually referred to as anatomically modern humans. Skull 5, male, 30-45 years old. The skull is massive, the forehead is sloping, the brow is large, the face is low and very wide. The chin prominence is well defined, but the chin does not protrude. The man was tall, about 179 centimeters, and had equatorial body proportions. The teeth were badly worn, there was an abscess. In addition, this man suffered from rheumatoid arthritis of the mandibular joint. Finds from Skull have been repeatedly dated by different methods. Thus, in 1999, the age of about 119,000 years was obtained by the method of thermoluminescence. The paramagnetic resonance method gave dates of 101,000 years. Family mound in Denmark. The remains of 2 of 3 people discovered in 1875 at the Borum Esche burial mound in Jutland, Denmark, the finds belong to the Late Bronze Age. The remains were buried in oak coffins, which allowed them to be dated by annual rings, and are currently stored in the Musgard Museum. The barrow was over 7 meters high and almost 38 meters in diameter. At one time, it was a large monumental building with several internal stone rooms set in stones and a stone fence built in steps. Probably it was used for a long time for religious purposes to commemorate the buried, who were highly respected by their fellow tribesmen. There were several burials in the large barrow, including 3 oak coffins, which were probably originally buried here. In the first burial, the oak is dated to approximately 1351 BC. The remains belong to a woman, 50-60 years old, a man of the same age, and a young man, 20-22 years old. Perhaps they were all relatives. The body of an elderly man is well preserved, even the muscles remained. The study showed that the buried was freshly shaven and even monitored the condition of the nails. The man lay on an ox skin and was covered with woolen blanket. The buried elderly woman was of small stature and heavy build. Analysis of the skeleton showed that she worked very hard. The young man was dressed in a woolen kilt, girded with a leather belt and shod in leather boots. He still has hair, probably cut under the pot. His burial is dated by the rings of the tree from which the coffin was carved to 1345 BC. Aliens in antiquity. The concept of aliens has been around for a very long time. Long before human civilization developed a scientifically based understanding of the cosmos, people around the world looked up into the sky above and wondered what was there. Some ancient societies inhabited these vast mysterious expanses with gods, being responsible for the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. In the past, people were also often persecuted for thinking differently. This was the case even in ancient Greece, despite the fact that it was famous for its innovative philosophers. When the philosopher Anaxagoras, who was trying to give a scientific explanation for such seemingly supernatural phenomena for those times as eclipses and rainbows, suggested the moon is not a god but a large stone and the sun is also a stone but hot, he was arrested and sentenced to death. Anaxagoras also considered the possibility that the moon might be habitable, which was a highly controversial suggestion, contradicting the dominant view of the cosmos as outlined by Plato and Aristotle. The belief in the existence of other worlds was taken up by many philosophers, including Epicurus, who once wrote to the historian Herodotus that there are an unlimited number of cosmoses, and some of them are like ours, and some are not. This belief, however weak, was preserved in ancient Rome. Nothing in the universe is unique, wrote the Roman poet Lucretius, and therefore in other distant spaces there must be other lands inhabited by various tribes of people and breeds of animals. Although Plato and Aristotle lived in a pre-Christian world, their ideas about the universe helped shape the doctrine of the Christian faith. In the Middle Ages, this belief proclaimed that the earth was created by God as the center of the universe. The story of Jesus Christ, who sacrificed himself to forgive the sins of men, established humanity as the most significant of all creations. If other worlds existed, they could not be inhabited. After all, if they existed, it would automatically reduce the significance of the crucifixion. Dominican monk, mathematician, and cosmological theorist Giordano Bruno did not wait until his death to share ideas about the universe. In 3 dialogues published between 1584 and 1591, Bruno suggested that some distant stars might be suns like ours, that planets also revolve around these suns, and finally, that some of these planets may be inhabited by life similar to the Earth. These views irritated the church, and in addition, Bruno's interest in magic and the occult led to his arrest in 1592. Refusing to renounce heresy, he was burned at the stake after 7 years of imprisonment and torture. Not all participants in the scientific revolution believed in the existence of aliens. Galileo, a devout Catholic, considered the talk of extraterrestrials blasphemous. British polymath William Whewell opposed the theory of many worlds, defending a special relationship between God and humanity. But oddly enough, his religiously motivated thesis, set forth 1853 book called On the Plurality of Worlds, turned out to be more scientifically accurate than the pagan astronomers he criticized. Whewell found an ally in Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist credited with formulating the theory of evolution by natural selection along with Charles Darwin. Our Earth is almost certainly the only habitable planet in our solar system, Wallace wrote in 1903. But even if life exists somewhere in the universe, Wallace was adamant that it could never reach the level of sophistication we find on Earth. Despite the fact that life outside the Earth may well exist, there has never been any evidence of this. Our telescopes do not allow a good look at potentially habitable planets, and radio observation of space does not give anything. The aliens also seem to be in no hurry to contact us. This situation is known as the Fermi paradox. It can be formulated as follows: alien civilizations must exist, but why haven't they made contact yet? 2 ancient Roman temples in the Netherlands. The temple complex was found at a clay mining site in the village of Hoven-Hameling, located in the eastern province of Gelderland near the German border. In ancient times, the border of the Roman state passed in this area, and therefore, scientists were especially surprised by this find. Nearby is Limes, a fortified borderline of the state. Research teams have discovered the remains of at least 2 Roman-era temples that were in use between the 1st and 4th centuries. One of them was of the Gallo-Roman type, had a tiled roof and richly painted walls. A slightly smaller temple stood a few meters away. Among the artifacts found in the ruins were the remains of statues of deities, as well as pits where Roman soldiers lit sacrificial fires. Among the finds were also painted fragments of plaster and tiles with inscriptions. Based on the types of inscriptions on the tiles, archaeologists believe that the temple complex was used by soldiers, since it was the military who made the tiles. Tiny votive vessel. A tiny clay vessel measuring 3 centimeters was found in the ancient city of Troy, located in Hizalik in modern Turkey, 30 kilometers southwest of Çanakkale. During archaeological excavations in the ancient city of Troy, an intact one of the tiny vessels was found for the first time, symbolically presented to the gods by those who did not have money in the sanctuary and who could not make other offerings. Archaeologists have stumbled upon a 2,300-year-old vessel made of the finest clay, which has a symbolic meaning. Previous excavations at Troy revealed that the site was a sanctuary. The area has been turned into a holy place thanks to the history of the Trojan War and the history of heroism. Troy is a very important center. This is a rare ancient city that still retains this feature. The 4,000-year-old ancient city of Troy perched atop the Hizalik Mounts and dominating the Turkish Aegean coastal plain is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. The first excavations in the ancient city were carried out in 1870 by the German entrepreneur Heinrich Schliemann. Europe's largest dinosaur skeleton. The remains of a representative of the species of the largest dinosaurs were found in the garden behind a residential building in the city of Pombal. The excavations began in 2017 when the owner of the house noticed fragments of a fossilized bone in his garden and contacted researchers from the University of Lisbon. Scientists have found the remains of a Brachiosaurus at the site, the largest of all dinosaurs and land animals that have ever existed on Earth. Brachiosaurs were herbivores, had long necks, and walked on 4 legs. The size of the bones suggests that the dinosaur was 12 meters high and 25 meters long. It is unusual to find all the ribs of such an animal, let alone retain their original anatomical position. Since the skeleton was found in a natural pose, the researchers hope that further excavations will be able to unearth more parts of the same dinosaur. Paleontologists believe that the animal died about 150 million years ago. Bird from Sakara. Have you ever heard of the mysterious story of the Sakara bird? Perhaps this is one of the most interesting objects that scientists managed to discover at the end of the 19th century. In 1898, an Egyptian archaeologist, Dr. Khalil Masika, excavated a burial site at Sappho. There, he accidentally discovered an unusual figurine of a bird. It was small and light, but it had a very interesting shape. The body of the figurine resembled a bird, but its wings looked exactly like the wings of a modern jet plane. They are made as a single element made from a single piece of wood, which is thickened in the middle and thinned at the ends. All this suggests that more than 2,000 years ago, the Egyptians had quite serious knowledge in the field of aerodynamics. That is why the find led Egyptologists into confusion, giving rise to many theories and disputes. What's more, when scientists made a copy of the figurine and tested it, they were able to verify that it could glide several meters by simply tossing the model into the air. The opinions of scientists are divided. Some argue that the resemblance of this bird to an airplane is completely accidental, while others believe that its author was an Egyptian genius who actually created a model of a modern aircraft. Woman in canoe. 800 years ago, mourners buried a young woman in a ceremonial canoe to send her on her last journey to the land of the dead in what is now Patagonia, according to a new study. This discovery disproves the theory that canoe burials could only have been used after Spanish colonization and confirms ethnographic and historical evidence that they were practiced throughout pre-Hispanic South America. The remains were found at an excavation site called Nuyan Antac near Lake Laca in western Argentina. The wooden canoes of the time, known as wampos, were hollowed out using fire. According to the analysis, the woman at the time of death was from 17 to 25 years old, but the cause of death could not be determined. They also found a jar near the head and almost 600 charred pieces of wood from a single Chilean cedar. The find is indeed unusual because most canoe burials were for men. Previous research has shown that burying people in canoes was part of the ritual to allow the dead to make their final journey through mystical waters to another land known as Namelofkin, where they would live in a place known as the destination of souls. Dinosaur footprints in Texas. American researchers found dinosaur footprints in Texas. Paw prints of a huge reptile, 4.5 meters tall, Acrocanthosaurus, were found in a dry riverbed after a severe drought caused the water level to drop. 113-million-year-old dinosaur footprints were discovered after a severe drought dried up a river in Texas. The footprints belong to a 4-meter Acrocanthosaurus, weighing 7 tons, and were discovered by experts in the Dinosaur Valley State Park. According to local experts, some of the prints also belong to Zava Poseidon, which was about 18 meters tall and weighed about 44 tons. Dinosaur Valley State Park boasts many dinosaur footprints, mostly ancient sauropods and theropods, but this is the first time these particular footprints have been seen. Sauropods include herbivorous dinosaur species such as Diplodocus and Brontosaurus, which had large flat feet like an elephant, while theropods such as Tyrannosaurus rex had clawed, three-toed feet. Acrocanthosaurus was, in terms of kinship, a cousin of Tyrannosaurus rex. The footprints in the park are believed to date back to the mid-Cretaceous, when the Dallas region of Texas was on the seashore. Inscription in Old Russian. This is a very interesting and controversial artifact. They have been working on reading it for more than 70 years. Although it seems that all the letters are legible, it's all about interpretation. Well, the very age of the find also adds space for discussion. Usually, the spread of writing in Russia is associated with baptism. The Cyrillic alphabet, which is used now, is considered to be the invention of the Enlightenment brothers, Cyril and Methodius. Although, to be completely honest, they invented the Glagolitic alphabet, and the Cyrillic alphabet was developed by one of the Cyril's students, the Bulgarian monk Clement of Ohrid. It is important that Cyrillic writing arrived in Russia in a monastic convoy. It was originally invented in order to make Christian texts available to the Slavs. The first books in Cyrillic are translations of the Holy Scriptures. However, near Smolensk in 1949, at the famous Gnezdovsky excavation site, a jug, almost intact, with an interesting inscription was found. This inscription was made quite clearly in Cyrillic, while the find dates back approximately to the middle of the 10th century. That is, the Cyrillic text was applied to the jug several decades before the baptism of Russia. This text is very short, just one word. It looks like this. All letters are written clearly, very clearly visible. Gorokcha. Historians and linguists are at a loss. Maybe it's about the mustard. You know how housewives in modern kitchens sign jars so as not to forget what is stored where. Or perhaps it means that something fuel was stored in the jug. For example, a mixture for Greek fire. Perhaps we have before us a jugs of some merchant who arrived from Moravia or from the Balkans, where the Cyrillic alphabet has already received a certain distribution. Then he could use this new but already very convenient alphabet for the Slavs to sign his property. When everyone was rich. In 1958, archaeologists made a discovery that was not inferior in importance to the discovery of Troy. In the valley of the Konya River in Turkey, the attention of researchers was attracted by an unusual place, which the locals called Çatalhöyük, or Double Hill. The largest of the two hills was 17.5 meters high, and archaeologists hoped to find something of interest here. The discoveries made in Çatalhöyük exceeded the wildest expectations. Archaeologists have unearthed an ancient city whose age has been dated between 6,800 to 5,800 BC. Such an age of the settlement seemed so unrealistic that its dating caused a wave of criticism of the method of radionuclide analysis. A few thousand years before our era, the division of human society into rich and poor has not yet occurred, and all the inhabitants of the city of Çatalhöyük had approximately the same income. As archaeologists managed to find out, they were quite rich. About 5,000–6,000 people lived in the city, which was a lot for that time. The life expectancy of the townspeople was also quite long. The inhabitants of Çatalhöyük were mainly engaged in the cultivation of cereals. However, cattle breeding was also developed in the city. On the territory of the settlement, archaeologists also found bones of fish and birds, vultures. From the Mediterranean coast, materials used to make jewelry, vessels, figurines were brought to the city. These were shells, marble, black limestone, etc. In addition to women's jewelry, mainly beads, archaeologists found in the city baskets with rouge, shells with some creams, and obsidian mirrors. In the beautiful temples of the city of Çatalhöyük, only women served. One of the most amazing finds made in the religious buildings of the city was the Star of Bethlehem, painted on the walls of one of the temples. Previously, archaeologists did not assume that this symbol has such ancient roots. Diseases that killed ancient Egypt. Thousands of years ago in the Eastern Mediterranean, several Bronze Age civilizations at about the same time were on the verge of collapse. The ancient kingdom of Egypt and the Akkadian Empire collapsed, and a widespread social crisis broke out in the ancient Near East and the Aegean Sea, which manifested itself in population decline, destruction, a decrease in trade, and significant cultural changes. In remains excavated from an ancient tomb in Crete, in a cave called Aios Karalendos, a team led by archaeogeneticist Gunnar Newman of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany has discovered genetic evidence for the existence of bacteria responsible for two of the most serial diseases in history: typhoid fever and plague. Therefore, according to the researchers, the widespread diseases caused by these pathogens cannot be discounted as a contributing factor to the social changes that were so widespread from about 2200 to 2000 BC. Yersinia pestis is the bacterium responsible for tens of millions of deaths, most of which occurred in 3 devastating global pandemics. It turned out that this bacterium has been infecting humans since at least the Neolithic period. Last year, scientists discovered that a Stone Age hunter-gatherer likely died of the plague thousands of years before there was evidence that the disease had reached epidemic proportions. Cyclops Skull. 2001, May 21st. A strange skull was found in the Rhodope Mountains, which the Bulgarian media soon dubbed the mystical skull. According to the author of the unusual find, he dreamed of it at first. It turned out that Roman Genchev, an avid collector of meteorites, had had the same dream for almost a month. He was sent on a business trip. On his day off, he went to the mountains and found the skull of a strange creature. Everything turned out that way. The skull was immediately examined by scientists. First of all, using radiocarbon dating, they were able to establish his age and conducted a DNA analysis. As you can see, the data obtained were so intriguing that it was classified. But in the era of the internet, it is quite problematic to hide information about such an unusual find. Reports about it first appeared on the net and then in a number of printed publications. Unfortunately, I couldn't find data on the age of the skull, but if we take into account that only its front part was found, neatly cut down by someone in time immemorial, the mysterious creature clearly fell from the hand of a man. Perhaps the unknown monster hunter was Theseus, the legendary Athenian king who defeated the Minotaur. Yes, the victory over the particular monster doesn't look like a myth. Presumably, the creature was small in stature, but it cannot be ruled out that the skull did not belong to an adult. We should also take into account the fact that we know nothing about the fighting qualities of the monster. Perhaps it had the ability to telepathically affect a person, spit poison, or operated under the cover of night, attacking from an ambush. The Rowan C Codex. The Rowan C Codex is a very ancient manuscript with many strange illustrations. This mysterious book has 448 pages. The author of this work is unknown, as well as the language in which it was written. The alphabet of this mysterious language contains 200 letters, and the pictures vary from images of military battles to a variety of religious symbols. The manuscript was found, as often happens, completely by accident. In the first half of the 19th century, it was presented to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences by Count Gustav Badiani, along with 3,000 other books. The count was from the city of Rowan C, and it is to that the manuscript owes its name. Now the city is called Rachnitz and is a territory of Austria. The book has rather modest dimensions, only 10 by 12 centimeters. On each page, from 9 to 14 rows of text are written by hand in some mysterious characters. The total number of characters that are used in the code is approximately 800. This is almost 10 times the size of any alphabet known to date, and most letters are sometimes repeated several times. Analysis of the paper show that the Rowan C Codex was written around the 16th century on Venetian paper. Once Hungarian scholars suggested reading the codex upside down, so the text resembled the Sumerian script. The Romanian philologists Vairica and Necic suggested that the text was originally written in the vulgar Latin dialect of Dacia. The direction of writing in it is from right to left and from bottom to top. Indian Mahesh Kumar Singh believes that the book is written from left to right and from top to bottom in a still undocumented version of the Brahmi script. The scientist transliterated the first 24 pages of the codex. As a result, he received the text in Hindi. According to other experts, the text of the book is a kind of code system. The language in which all this is written is of artificial origin, simply speaking, made up. Experts say that the Rowan C Codex is a common Catholic prayer book. It mainly contains paraphrases from the New Testament that tell about the early life of Jesus Christ. In the book, scientists even found the date when it was written. This is 1593. Roasted nuts in antiquity. Of course, roasted nuts don't seem like much of a surprise these days, and everyone, and even you at least once in your life, tried this amazing delicacy. But in ancient times, people were not so willing to cook food. Why roast nuts if they're already tasty and healthy? The other thing is meat. So scientists from the Center for Baltic and Scandinavian Archaeology claim that people in Germany mastered the technology of roasting hazelnuts about 10,000 years ago. Personally, I like cashews more. And which nuts do you like? Write in the comments under the video. In the Dubensee swamp in northern Germany, archaeologists have found 10,500-year-old cremated bones. By the way, these are the first bones discovered at this place and the oldest ones that could be found on the territory of present-day Germany. Historians believe that the Dubensee was once a lake where people used to catch fish, which they cooked on a fire nearby. And at that very moment, the hazelnuts were roasted. That is, people in ancient times were those gourmets. Most likely, people came to this place in autumn and collected nuts. Archaeologists have found smaller and larger hazelnut roasting pits. They also found bark mats for sitting on damp soil and pieces of worked flint. Local tools are very similar to those found in Britain. This proves that people in ancient times exchanged experience with the neighboring region. To get to each other, they used a dug-a-land land corridor, which is now flooded due to climate change. The most interesting thing is that flint is not found in nature in this region. It was brought here from another place, and archaeologists discovered the bones of ancient people here quite by accident. Now we know that roasted hazelnuts were once very popular in Germany, and in Japan, they discovered a terrible message from antiquity. A warning from the depth of time. Japan is one of the most developed countries in the world. While located in one of the most dangerous regions of the planet, an entire country with a population of many millions lives in danger every day. The most interesting thing is that this has always been the case throughout the existence of this region, and people have lived here for centuries. This forced the ancestors of the Japanese to understand natural phenomena. Throughout Japan, there are so-called tsunami stones. These are ancient plates with inscriptions that warn that it is dangerous to build houses below a certain mark. If a tsunami happens, the houses in this place will flood. One of the most famous of these stones is located in the village of Naoc. A text is carved on a 3-meter slab that reads, "High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the disaster of the Great Tsunami. Do not build houses below this point." On other stones, a warning is written that people should be afraid of an earthquake because after it, a tsunami will come. Stone slabs of this kind are found all over the Japanese coastline, and some of them over 600 years old. The problem is that many Japanese do not believe this kind of prediction written on stones. It seems to them that these are just ancient curses. They build their homes in dangerous regions, after which entire families suffer and die. It seems to me that people in ancient times, when placing these stones, experienced more than one tragedy, and which they decided to warn, after which they decided to warn their descendants. Well, the descendants consider themselves smarter than their ancestors. We don't want to listen to our grandparents either, do we? Yes, the ancestors did not have high technologies and modern measuring instruments, but they had well-developed senses of observation and some worldly wisdom. Therefore, we should definitely listen to our past. That's what archaeologists did with the next find. Kensington Runestone. Discovered in 1898 in central Minnesota, this enigmatic stone is a beautiful piece of stone engraved with many ancient Scandinavian letters. Yes, Scandinavian letters in North America. Archaeologists and historians have long puzzled over the dating of the Kensington stone and determined it to be 1362. Were the ancient Vikings able to get to this place in the 14th century? This find was of great interest to local Swedes and Americans who live in Minnesota. But linguists were not so happy with the find. About 100 years ago, experts almost unanimously declared that a certain work of the 19th century was written on the stone. Despite some disputes between scientists and historians, it is still believed that this work is about 100 years old. Why then does the dating indicate the 14th century, and who is right? Is it possible the historians here do not want to agree that this stone is older than it seems, otherwise they will have to rewrite history and many historians historical events that are now so well placed in school textbooks. And as we know, humanity is in no hurry to write the truth so as not to cause people to panic. If it was still possible to read the ancient Scandinavian texts, then with Maya writing, everything is much more complicated. How a scientist deciphered the Mayan script. The greatest discovery in the study of ancient Mexico was made by the Soviet ethnographer Yuri Knorozov. He did what no one else had done before. He found the key to reading ancient Mayan writing. Although he first visited Mexico only 40 years after his discovery, yes, you can make world-class discoveries from thousands of kilometers away. Yuri Knorozov was an interesting, mysterious, and silent person. There were various stories and tales about him. He was fond of mysticism, Indians, and the decipherment of ancient writing. As I said earlier, he came to Mexico decades after his discovery. It was in the 90s of the last century. He was greeted as a local star, as an artist, while in Russia, where he lived all his life, few people knew about him. He was born in Kharkiv in 1922 in a Russian intelligent family. During World War II, he and his family moved to Moscow, where he became interested in ethnography. Later, he moved to Leningrad. Back in Moscow, Knorozov came across an article by the German scientist Paul Schelhes, who argued that deciphering the Mayan script was an impossible task. The young scientist took it as a challenge, and he believed that if something was created by the human mind, that it could be unraveled by another human mind. While still a student at Moscow University, Knorozov helped sort out the archive of war trophies from Germany, and among the materials of the Berlin Library, discovered an edition of 3 surviving handwritten Mayan codes published in 1930. In addition, he came across another important document, the Report on Affairs in the Yucatan of the 16th century. It was written by the Catholic bishop Diego de Landa after the Spanish conquest of Mexico and the Maya. After studying the documents, he realized that each Mayan sign is read as a syllable and proposed a system for reading the entire language. In 1952, the scientist published an article, Ancient Writing of Central America, in an ethnographic journal where he outlined his method. His work was appreciated in scientific circles and he received an offer to write a dissertation on this topic. When Yuri Knorozov began to decipher the ancient texts of the Maya more, he realized that this mysterious civilization had its own script, army, and administrative apparatus. This means that the Maya had a state. It was previously believed that the ancient Maya were barbarians and conquerors. After deciphering ancient texts, the scientist received many awards. He was awarded in the USSR. Students and officials came to him from Guatemala, Mexico, and the USA. He has been compared to Jean Champollion, who deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs in the 19th century. During his trip to Mexico and Guatemala, the scientist visited all the significant places of the ancient Maya, Palenque, Merida, Axmal, and with his own eyes saw the writings of the Maya. From the Mexican ambassador to Russia, he received an honorary award, the Order of the Aztec Eagle, which he was very proud of. In the meantime, archaeologists are trying to study another mystical find: stone thread connecting the eras. Funeral practices throughout history have been full of mysteries. All people for thousands of years buried the dead in different ways. At the place of burial of the deceased relatives, people from ancient times erected memorial structures, steles, mounds, later obelisks, crosses, monuments. The more prominent the deceased was, the more expressive his grave looked. The ancient Egyptians buried their rulers in giant pyramids. The peoples of Asia poured mounds from the ground or laid them out of stone. Residents of Altai in Russia called such sculptures kazatach. These stone giants have survived wars and natural disasters, cataclysms, and negligent human attitude. Tombstones look like real people. Many have pronounced facial features, clothing, and even jewelry. On the best preserved idols, even belts with typesetting plaques are visible. Their number and material during life determine the status of a person in society. Archaeologists have discovered a large number of stone statues in the Altai Mountains. This indicates their mass production. Scientists concluded that in ancient times, people picked up stones so that they were easier and less processed. The stone ancestors of the Altai Mountains can tell a lot about the people who lived here, how they looked, how they dressed, what they fought, what they ate. For a long time, nothing was known about them. They were far from prying eyes, and only recently they began to be found and studied en masse. Kazatosh is the memory of ancestors. This is a thread that binds entire generations, and in no case should you break such a thread. A people without a past has no future. From Russia, we will go to America, where interesting artifacts are waiting for us. Relics of Michigan. Did an ancient advanced culture once live in Michigan in the USA? The digger James Oscottford tried to answer this question, who in October 1890 found ancient artifacts in Ardmore, Michigan. Cups, figurines, and inscribed tablets were very reminiscent of finds found in the Middle East. Other diggers in the region have made similar finds besides Scottford. All artifacts were sold to buyers and collectors. It's just something else that's interesting. The vast majority of historians and archaeologists claim that all these finds are carefully planned forgery. They believe that the so-called artifacts were well thought out and copied from other artifacts found around the world. After our hero created ancient artifacts, he decided to bury them so that later he and other diggers would find them. Thus, everything would look realistic and believable. Clay objects crumbled at the slightest contact with water, how they could then be stored in the ground for thousands of years. Ancient writings were chaotically written on tablets without any pattern or logic. The figurines were a copy of the finds found in the Far East. Only their quality was much lower and not so durable. These were the main arguments of archaeologists who conducted a superficial analysis of the ancient relics of Michigan. One thing is for sure, James Scottford wanted to make money, and he did a great job of it. But the next find discovered in Mexico is the real one. Rare Mayan canoe. I have already talked about the decoding of the Maya writing, and now let's look at the transport used by the Maya. In the previous video, if someone has not seen it, I already said that during the construction of the Mayan train railway route, archaeologists constantly find ancient buildings and artifacts of a mysterious civilization. This time on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, archaeologists found a well-preserved wooden canoe. The canoe was found in a freshwater reservoir, a cenote. It was completely submerged in water and at the same time perfectly preserved. The marshland is a great help to preserve ancient objects due to the low amount of oxygen. The length of the canoe is 1.5 meters, the width is 80 centimeters. According to preliminary data, the canoe was used as a container for storing water or a container for offering during ritual purposes and dates back to approximately 830–950 AD. This canoe is the only one of its kind that has survived in its original form, although it is more than 1,000 years old. Scientists will create a 3D model of the canoe. This will help to better and safer study the ancient object. During the construction of the railway route, archaeologists discovered more than 80 Mayan burials and the ruins of more than 2,400 pre-Hispanic structures. Ecologists, archaeologists, as well as representatives of Mayan communities actively oppose the construction of railway line. You can see some other finds in this place in the previous video on the channel, but only after watching this video, because the next mysterious object will definitely surprise you. Lonely Red Mountain. Australian Aborigines call this mountain Uluru. European discoveries named it as Rock almost 150 years ago. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary in this mountain, an ordinary rock formation in the middle of a semi-desert, but the number of tourists was amazing. Every year, this figure reached hundreds of thousands of people. the peak of the popularity of this mountain in October 2019. It was then that local authorities forbade tourists to climb it, and in September 2020, Google even removed Street View 3D panoramas from their online maps. Mount Uluru is located in the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park in Central Australia. This block was formed from sedimentary rocks 680 million years ago. Uluru is 3.5 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide, and 348 meters high from base to top. In most of the photos, Uluru looks like a completely lonely mountain, which definitely adds to its mystery. Archaeologists say that people lived near this mountain 10,000 years ago. The first Europeans arrived in Australia in 1788, but reached Mount Uluru only 100 years later in 1870, all because of the specific arid climate. For local Aborigines, the mountain is a sacred place. There are legends about it, and traditional religious rites are held next to it. In order for local people to have the opportunity to visit this place, local authorities turned the territory into the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park. Red Mountain has become one of the main attractions of Australia, so an airport was built 20 kilometers from this place. Now from 300 to 400,000 tourists come here every year, and it was because of the invasion of tourists that this place became more closed. Wherever human footsteps, debris and destruction remain. Have mountains of garbage caused the removal of 3D panoramas from Google Maps? It is possible to climb the mountain without the help of climbing equipment, but this doesn't mean that it is easy to do so. Over the past 50 years, about 40 people have died here. For this reason, local authorities have banned climbing to the top. How wonderful that there is Google that allows you to go to the mountain using a smartphone or a computer, but the local natives did not like it. Let me remind you that the mountain is a sacred place, and some places on the mountain are taboo for them. Not only can they not be visited, but even seeing them is a terrible violation, even if it's just a photo. Modern natives also use smartphones, and in order not to accidentally see photos of these places on the internet, Google at the request of local authorities removed the pictures previously uploaded by tourists. Human skeleton in a flooded cave. At the beginning of the video, we will go to the Caribbean coast of Mexico in a cave system that was flooded at the end of the Ice Age. Here, an amateur archaeologist discovered the skeleton of a prehistoric man that is over 8,000 years old. I want to note that these are not the first human remains discovered in the caves of Mexico. At this point, the government plans to build a high-speed train through the jungle and attract tourists. And as often happens, the best archaeological discoveries occur in the places of future construction. Archaeologists and divers claim that the skeleton was too far from the entrance to the cave, which means that the ancient man could not have swum that far without the use of modern equipment. According to other studies, the water level was much lower around that time, so the caves were flooded after people began to live here. Who the skeleton belongs to and what its exact age remains to be seen, but we know exactly where one of the oldest human teeth on the planet was found. 1.8 million-year-old human tooth. And now we will go to Georgia, to the South Caucasus. It is here that one of the earliest prehistoric settlements in Europe is located. And the other day again, archaeologists were in for an incredible surprise. They found one of the oldest teeth on the planet belonging to the human species. This once again confirms that Georgia was one of the first places where our ancestors went to conquer Europe. Most likely, the European species of man originated from this region. The tooth was found about 100 kilometers from the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, in the village of Orzmany. Stone tools and animal remains were previously found here, but the remains of Homo erectus were discovered here for the first time. Not far from this place, in the late 90s, early 2000s, human skulls aged 1.8 million years were found here. It was the first find of its kind outside of Africa. This forced scientists to change their understanding of the migration of the human species. Based on these findings, archaeologists claim that Georgia was one of the first places where ancient man arrived during his migration from Africa. According to Georgi Bedzanashvili, scientific leader of the excavation team, this tooth belongs to the cousin of Zeva and Mzea. This was the name of the owners of the fossilized skulls which were discovered earlier in the Menacee. But the oldest fossilized remains of the genus Homo are still considered to be part of the jaw found in Ethiopia. It is about 2.8 million years old. Scientists suggest that the first migrations began about 2 million years ago, although ancient tools have been discovered in China that are 2.1 million years old. This suggests that we still have a lot to learn about the ancient world. That's why our channel is here to help you, and we move on. Royal Crypt in Peru. This time we will go to South America, where treasure hunters from all over the world have been stealing ancient burials in Peru for decades. Fortunately, they missed the huge royal crypt, which belonged to a little-studied civilization. Under a layer of sand, this crypt hid from robbers for more than 1,000 years. In the town of El Castillo de Wami, Professor Milos Kush, in his entire life, saw many terrible things that he hadn't seen anywhere else on our planet. Here we found the remains of ancient insects that fed on human flesh, and snakes coiled into rings at the bottom of ceramic vessels. And during one of the expeditions, a swarm of giant bees flew into archaeologists. It's like the plot of a movie. But this is exactly what the work of archaeologists in the impenetrable jungle looks like, and also that we can explore the ancient world. For more than 100 years, tomb raiders have hoped to find a tomb with mummies wrapped in precious fabrics and adorned with precious stones. Milos Kirsch believed that in El Castillo, he could find that very mysterious tomb, although most of the people from his entourage dissuaded him from this expedition. He believed that some important event of that time took place in this place about 1,000 years ago. Many artifacts of the Peruvian Huari civilization were found in these parts. Thanks to the drone, a group of researchers managed to see the outlines of the walls on the hill. It turned out that this was only the beginning of a great expedition. Hidden underground was a gigantic labyrinth of high walls and towers. Archaeologists even managed to determine that the walls were painted bright red. Under the ground, it was possible to discover the royal tomb, with 4 queens and more than 50 remains of noble persons. Copper axes, silver bowls, and gold jewelry, this is what black diggers hunted for. And only Milos Kirsch managed to find it in the tomb in El Castillo. In ancient times, it was believed that the status of a person is important not only during life, but also after death. Therefore, the burial of important people was so rich. From the little information that we know about the Huari civilization, we know that women were skilled craftswomen and made fabrics that were better than the Flemish and Dutch weavers of the 16th century. Mystery of the Black Slime. Scientists have finally solved the mystery of the black slime often found in Egyptian tombs. In 2018, in Alexandria, archaeologists unearthed a giant black sarcophagus that was completely filled with this terrible substance. And only a few years later, scientists were able to understand what it is. Let me remind you that scientists and historians expected to see Alexander the Great in this sarcophagus, but when they opened it, they were amazed. There were 3 skeletons in it, 2 men and 1 woman. These skeletons were filled with a black substance. Conspiracy theorists joined the study. They claimed that by opening this tomb, humanity would be cursed, and those who opened it would release a black force that would spread throughout the planet. Fortunately, scientists are not cowards. The researchers collected more than 100 samples of mucus from other ancient Egyptian burials. The analysis showed that the mucus consists of vegetable oil, tree resin, beeswax, animal fat, and bitumen. At least all of the samples contained ingredients. Only the proportions differed. Interestingly, all of these ingredients were imported to Egypt, and the mixing was carried out by dedicated specialists. First, the mummy was immersed in a sarcophagus, and then it was coated or filled with this liquid. Most likely, in addition to the religious meaning, black mucus also helped as a preservation of the deceased. It was believed that in this way the mummy would be safe, both spiritually and physically. 1,000-year-old Mayan Saddle Man. A mysterious ancient Mayan Saddle Man was discovered by archaeologists in a Mennonite farm in Saddle Man. The ruined dwellings look like white mounds. Scientists have studied pottery found in these places and dated it between 250 and 600 AD. As you know, this period went down in history for its large-scale construction and urbanization. In those days, the Maya had a well-developed artistic art. The buildings have plastered floors and a collection of domestic cooking vessels, and in some buildings, archaeologists have found agricultural tools made of flint. The Maya had a well-developed agriculture and they used the forests to breed animals in their natural environment. This is indicated by the massive accumulation of bones in this area. One of the buildings looked like an ancient temple, completely plastered with white limestone, and the flint items found there were most likely used as ceremonial offerings. Skull with strange symbols. A sensational discovery was shown to the public by Mexican researcher Pablo Enrique Garcia Sanchez. He stated that not only people lived on Earth, but as evidence he showed a certain skull. However, this find raises many questions. About 4 years ago, near the city of Taxco, miners approached Pablo Garcia. They said that at a depth of 30-35 years, they began to find very strange objects. The collection of artifacts surprised even the explorer. The miners brought to the surface beads made of various semi-precious stones, a jade blade, and various amulets and talismans made of bone. These finds amazed the archaeologist, and he turned to the government with a request to excavate the mine and close it for a while. After obtaining permission, he immediately began excavations. He managed to find more than 100 household items, ritual tools, and jewelry. But what is unique in all this is something else. Almost every item had inscriptions in an unknown language. And at the beginning of this year, a group of archaeologists led by our hero found a skull of an unusual shape. Scientists immediately conducted a thorough analysis of the object. Dating showed that it was over 16,000 years old. The skull had inscriptions similar to artifacts found earlier. DNA analysis revealed 4 strands instead of 3. Pablo Garcia considered this skull to be divine. He is sure that the gods of the ancient Indians visited our planet tens of thousands of years ago, and this skull belongs to one of the ancient deities. But the rest of the items, he believes that they were produced by ordinary people. Last year at the same place, archaeologists found a 4-toed mummy of a creature that looked like a dog. Pablo did not manage to conduct a DNA analysis. Of course, scientists in Mexico for the most part did not believe Pablo Enrique and consider him a charlatan. However, some scientists argue that this is a real sensation, which 100% confirms the existence of paleocontacts in antiquity. What do you think? How real are the skull and artifacts found in the mine? X-ray of ancient mummies. 2015 Pachacamac Archaeological Site in Peru. 200 mummified remains discovered. Most of them were wrapped with several layers of fabric, and so that when trying to deploy them, the mummies did not collapse. It was necessary to use modern technologies. Canadian scientists from the University of Western Ontario scanned ancient mummies using a mobile X-ray complex. They have been dated to 1100 and 1470 AD. In 6 days, anthropologists took about 900 X-rays and performed more than 30 computer scans. Later, with the help of specialized computer programs, all the photographs were combined into a digital image. Thus, it was possible to understand that not all mummies were preserved in good condition, and in some pictures, they were in for a surprise. In the heads of the mummies were mysterious artifacts, the purpose of which is still unclear. One of the artifacts looked like a bent disc. Archaeologists nicknamed it tacos. In one mummy, a sharp object was examined in the eye socket, and in the other, a tattoo was noticed on the arm. One mummy was covered in cotton seeds. Scientists have not yet been able to explain the reason for this. It was assumed that this was done for ritual purposes. In the tissues with which the mummies were wrapped, scientists examined small shells, stone, and unidentified artifacts. Despite such a huge number of mummies in one place, archaeologists still have the main question. The mummification procedure was carried out deliberately, or was it the result of a dry climate confinement and burial in the sand helped the mummies survive to this day. Mythical creatures in the basement. It's 2006, England. A team of workers planned to demolish the house. It was the most ordinary day. The workers did not even suspect what kind of surprise they would expect during work. Going down to the basement, the workers found something. In the basement, they found hundreds of cardboard boxes. To their delight, they thought that the boxes contained very old aged wine. But if there was wine in the boxes, then this video would be released on another channel. They opened the boxes and saw mummies in them. They were not human mummies or even animals. They were strange mummies of some mythical creatures. Hundreds of mummies of different fairies and gnomes. They were very frightened and decided to check who originally owned this mansion. The first owner of the house was named Thomas Theodore Merlin. Believe it or not, this man lived to be 160 years old, and he always looked younger than his peers. Those who knew him personally said that at the age of 80 he looked 40. There were many legends about this man, and it was believed that he had invented the elixir of eternal youth. But as I said earlier, he only lived to 160. This unique man was born in the north of England in the city of Hallinshire in 1782. In the 19th century, Thomas Theodore Merlin traveled the country displaying his unique collection of mythical creatures. It was called the Merlin Cryptid Collection. Unfortunately, in those days his tour was not a success, and many considered him a scammer. Personally, I think that now he would have much more fans. There is a feeling that people these days believe much more nonsense. Thomas wrote about his failures and achievements in a diary that was found next to the mummies. The cause of death is still not known. Arrow of the Unfortunate Hunter. Glacial archaeology no longer seems to be something new and unique. With the global melting of glaciers, archaeologists have more work to do. It's just that now you have to dress warmer and go to excavations in rather deserted places. As part of glacial archaeology, scientists study ancient biological materials such as dung, food, and plant remains, and artifacts that have been stored under ice for a long time. The first and one of the most important ice finds was a mummy discovered in 1991 by German tourists in the Ostal Alps. This find is more than 5,000 years old. I already talked about this mummy in one of my previous videos. This year, on the 1st of September, archaeologists found an ancient arrow which is tentatively 800-900 years old. Upon closer examination, archaeologists discovered that on one side the arrow was broken and the ancient hunter was trying to repair it, but most likely here the hunter was overtaken by failure. After all, he did not succeed in using the arrow. Scientists in a detailed study noticed that this arrow never penetrated into any living organism. In addition to the arrow, archaeologists have found several remains of textiles. The purpose is not yet known. There is an assumption that these could have been pieces from a larger fabric, perhaps his clothes or a bag, maybe linen or cotton. Interestingly, until 1813, there was a ban on the import of cotton in Norway, and the found pieces of fabric are much older. Most likely, the owner of the arrow was a traveler and arrived Norway from warmer countries. Egyptian mummy got a name. A high-profile event took place within the walls of Stanford University, USA. They uncovered the secret of an ancient mummy. The exhibit was kept in the Museum of the Educational Institution for more than 100 years. Initially, it was part of the private collection of the founder of the university. But during the earthquake in 1906, the sarcophagus was severely damaged and was no longer exhibited to the general public. The scientists didn't care either. The discovery happened by accident. This spring, a student of the museum culture course, Ariel Algaze, was examining the tomb and suddenly noticed an inscription. Since nothing was mentioned about this text in any documents, the girl decided to do it herself. It turned out that the woman's name, Sensulentus, was written on the sarcophagus, as well as an epitaph. Let this name remain for centuries. Scientists who took up the study of this artifact managed to establish that the woman died around 30 BC. It is noteworthy that the inscriptions of that era, which are so well preserved, are almost never found. Beer flood in London. Many are sure that the event of 1814 is a legend, but no. On October 17, 1814, at the then largest brewery Horseshoe, one of the wooden vats for storing beer exploded, the height of which was approximately 10 meters. But that was only the beginning. A powerful jet of liquid simply demolished the valve of another similar capacity, and then the domino mode turned on. Almost 2 million liters of beer poured into the streets of London. The force of this drunken tsunami was so powerful that 8 people died, but in fact, there were more victims. A huge number of people immediately rushed to drink free beer and got alcohol poisoning. What is known about Egyptian animals? Quite often during excavations, scientists had to deal with images of animals. This is especially true of excavations that are being conducted in Egypt. But despite the fact that the data is quite old, scientists managed to unravel the mystery of the state of ecology more than 6 years ago. The images that were encountered are animals. They were carved on stone, wood, on ceremonial accessories. And it turns out that according to the frescoes found on the territory of Egypt, at that time there were about 37 species of large mammals, but now there are only 8 of them left. More animals died during droughts. These are varieties of lions, zebras, and even wild dogs. The mystery of the origin of the Black Death. The year 1347 marks the outbreak of one of the worst epidemics in European history. Hundreds of years later, scientists have finally managed to unravel the mystery of the origin of the Black Death. The bacterium Yersinia pestis was carried by fleas and lice. It spread rapidly and in subsequent years destroyed up to 60% of the population of Western Eurasia. And even after that, the pathogen repeatedly caused local outbreaks over several centuries. Scientists have long argued about the origin of the disease. Hypotheses based on historical records and generic data considered a range of possible places of origin from Western Eurasia to East Asia. Some scholars are looking for the roots of the Black Death in the Karakoram region of South Asia. Others consider the Mongol Empire a possible source of the plague. They suspect that even Genghis Khan could have died from the plague. However, Maria Spiro and her colleagues took a different path. Archaeologists discovered graves near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan a century and a half ago. Some tombstones point to a previously unknown epidemic that occurred in 1338 and 1339. That is almost 10 years before the arrival of the Black Death in Europe. Since then, there have been rumors that those who died in the cemeteries of Kara-Jigek and Burana could have died from the plague. To clarify this issue, the research team took samples from 7 medieval plague victims. The tissues of the disease contained Yersinia pestis DNA. Scientists compared the DNA sequences of the plague genomes from Kyrgyzstan with 203 modern and 47 historical representatives. Using this data, they recreated the genealogical tree of the plague and tried to classify the pathogen from Kyrgyzstan in terms of evolution. Result: the plague DNA from Kyrgyzstan is more original and older than any other Yersinia pestis gene sequence known to date since the 14th century. DNA samples from Kyrgyzstan now show that the ancestor of all 4 plague lines came from the area around Lake Issyk-Kul. Napoleon's defeat in the battle with the rabbits. It was hardly possible to imagine that the famous Napoleon Bonaparte could suffer such a shameful loss from a herd of rabbits. In 1807, in July, the commander decided to celebrate the signing of the Treaty of Tilsit by hunting Eard. Before the hunt, he decided to have dinner, and at that time, 3,000 rabbits were sitting in cages, waiting for the start of the hunt. And when it started and the animals were released into the field, they did not run away in fear but attacked the hunters, including Bonaparte. The rabbits clung to his clothes, threw themselves at his feet, and the Corsican had to shamefully flee. And the reason was quite simple. Instead of wild rabbits for hunting, they found tame ones that were not afraid of people. The fall of the largest city in North America. In North America, there was the largest city of Cahokia, which included more than 120 burial mounds. The city was located in the floodplain of the Mississippi River, and about 20,000 people lived in it. At the same time, for comparison, this is much more than in modern European cities. But there is evidence that sometimes the population of the city reached 40,000 people. Oddly enough, but the ancient settlement existed until the 13th century, and then fell into decay. There is no data on why this happened, and many scientists believe that it was due to a natural disaster, but recently, during research, it was revealed that the city was destroyed as a result of severe floods. 600 million gap in the fossil record. A fossil smaller than a sesame seed has revealed the unseen early history of animals on Earth. Previous phylogenetic studies modeling the evolution of groups of related organisms suggested that the animals that gave rise to sea sponges, sea anemones, worms, and crustaceans first appeared 600–700 million years ago. But until now, scientists have not had undeniable fossil evidence for the existence of any animals before 575 million years ago. A new fossil, apparently the ancestor of a Precambrian sea sponge, has been discovered in 600-million-year-old rocks in China. Its hundreds of thousands of microscopic cells are perfectly preserved in phosphate minerals. The body consists of three vase-like openings, the walls of which are riddled with minute pores, just like modern sponges, which pump water through the openings to filter out food. Earlier, tiny fossils containing 8 or 16 cells were found in the same rocks, which were thought to be sponge embryos. The new fossil is more convincing because it finally shows an adult animal. A rock layer in southern China called the Jushantou Formation is known for its microfossils. Painting in a cave. Archaeological research is still ongoing in Turkey. According to them, cave paintings were found near the city of Konya, which date back to the Neolithic era. Initially, this was taken for an ancient map of the world, which depicted a community in chattel, which existed here about 9,000 years ago. But after the fresco was examined, scientists came to the conclusion that it depicts a volcanic eruption. And if you look geographically, then this is also confirmed by the presence of two hills, which are located not far from this place. A pumice stone was also found near this place, the age of which is about 8,900 years. The Roman senator was a horse. The story is pretty well known. The horse of the eccentric Caligula, named Incited, was so adored by the owner that he had an ivory stall, purple blankets, a marble stable, and a necklace of precious stones. Caligula made his horse a senator and planned to promote him to consul. Most likely it was not the madness of the ruler, but his mockery of the then senators, they say. Even a horse will cope with their tasks. Skull with drilled base. The Ottoman Empire, throughout its existence, waged constant wars, capturing more and more new territories. So in 1480, the Italian city of Otranto was captured. The troops of the Ottoman Empire plundered the city, killed the local population while choosing mainly the adult male population. In total, no more than 800 people were left alive in the city, who were offered to convert to Islam in exchange for freedom. But the people refused, and they were executed. After 300 years, these residents were canonized as saints and were considered the patrons of the city. But after, during the excavations, scientists were attracted by one skull in which about 16 holes were drilled. Scientists have suggested that the holes were not because of death, but were drilled after the person had already died in order to extract bone powder, and it was used as a medicine. Toilet disaster in the Roman Empire. More than 800 years ago, when the Holy Roman Empire was not yet Germany, a story happened there that would have been very comical if not for the dead people. In 1184, King Henry VI of Germany was making a detour of the Erfurt region and decided to meet nobles from all over the Holy Empire. At the Petersburg citadel there were too many guests, and on July 25, 1184, the second floor of the building simply could not stand it and collapsed. The nobility fell through the first floor into the basement, which was just a restroom. About 60 people drowned in feces. King Henry escaped by accident. He was not standing on a wooden floor, but in a niche with a stone floor. Mystery of ancient burials in Great Britain. In medieval Europe, rich and noble people were sometimes buried as if they had just fallen asleep. That is, not in coffins or sarcophaguses, but in beds. At the same time, scientists have long puzzled over how and why the tradition of bed burial spread from Eastern Europe to Britain. A recent study provides answers to these and other questions. It showed that burial in beds in England began in the 7th century AD, and this rite was considered exclusively female. That is, men were buried in ordinary coffins. The tradition arose with the arrival of Christianity in this territory. Over time, it became a common ritual throughout Europe. But how is burial on a bed related to Christianity in general, and why did women spread this rite? In a recent study published in Medieval Archaeology, scientists analyzed 72 bed burials in different European countries, from Slovakia to England. At the same time, they immediately noticed that in England, only women were buried in beds. This prompted them to conclude that bed burial practice began to spread in Europe at a time when women were actively moving around Europe. After the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, Christianity fell out of favor. England at that time generally became almost completely pagan. The situation changed in the 7th century when the Church actively began the conversion of non-Christian regions to Christianity. To this end, Pope Gregory I took various measures. In particular, he encouraged marriages between Christian women and non-Christian men. Moreover, Christian women tried to marry men who had a high status in society. They eventually converted their husbands to Christianity and thus promoted their religion in society. In search of husbands from among the elite, they went to different countries of Europe, including England. At the same time, women also brought funeral rites. Therefore, such burials eventually became associated in England with femininity and Christianity. So why did Christians between the 5th and 7th centuries bury people in beds rather than coffins? It should be understood that in those days, not everyone had wooden beds. This furniture was a luxury and spoke of the status of a person. Many people slept simply on straw mattresses. Christian women tried to look for wealthy husbands from the elite of society. In addition, death itself in the Christian religion is not considered the final end for a person. Therefore, Christians equated it with eternal sleep. That is, people thus emphasized their attitude to death. However, the tradition of burying people in bed did not last long. Subsequently, coffins began to be used for this. I will note that this is far from the most unusual rite. For example, in China, it was customary to bury his servants and warriors alive along with the royal person. Microscopy reveals ancient secrets. By tiny details, scientists recreate the life of long-disappeared states. Photomicrographs of archaeological artifacts showcase their hidden beauty and reveal ancient secrets of how they were created and used in ancient times. Findings of ancient mummies, long-vanished cities, ancient tools, jewelry, and other objects help archaeologists piece together the past of mankind, while imaging technologies allow research that does not damage fragile materials. With the help of microscopy, X-rays, magnetic radiometry, infrared, and ultraviolet light, scientists can access hidden evidence about the life of ancient people. For example, 17th century Persian textiles contained fibers of silk thread that were individually wrapped in thin strips of metal. In another striking image on a ceramic title from Gordian, dating from the first half of the 6th century BC, basalt inclusions are visible. According to Mary Claude Bolo, director of the exhibition, these inclusions could tell archaeologists whether the shingles were made locally or brought from other areas. Based on this information, it is possible to draw up historical trade routes. An analysis of the light spots on the gold bead of Yor's Queen Pua base cloak is expected to allow researchers to trace the geological origin of the gold. Molasses flood in Boston. And on January 15, 1919, in the American town of Boston, Massachusetts, molasses, a sweet, viscous substance made from sugarcane or sugar beet, spilled over the city. It happened on the premises of the Purity Distilling Company and its molasses processing plant. A huge reservoir, 15 meters high and 27 meters in diameter, exploded and 10 million liters of molasses poured into the city. The substance flooded neighboring streets, killed 21 people and several horses, and another 150 were injured to varying degrees. There is evidence that the sweet wave was almost 8 meters high and spilled at a speed of 56 kilometers per hour. Rock paintings 2,700 years old. On the site of ancient Nineveh, which was once the capital of the Assyrian Empire, archaeologists have discovered mysterious rock paintings. Nineveh was surrounded by a strong 12-kilometer wall, in which there were 15 gates. The most interesting thing is that each gate had its own name. So, during the reconstruction of one of the gates called Mashki, that was the name of one of the 15 Assyrian gods, archaeologists delved into several cultural layers and found 12 marble slabs with ancient bas-reliefs there. If not for the terrorist group Islamic State, which destroyed this gate in 2016, then archaeologists would now have much less work, and the preservation of ancient architecture would be much better. It is terrible to realize that in our days, humanity continues to destroy our history. Once I already talked about Buddha statues in Afghanistan, which were also destroyed by terrorists. The bas-reliefs belong to the era of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, who ruled from 705 to 681 BC. Most likely, the bas-reliefs decorated the palace of Sennacherib, and later the grandson of the king used them to build the gate. The bas-reliefs that remained on the surface were completely destroyed and the drawings on them disappeared, and those slabs that archaeologists dug up were quite well preserved. The Assyrian Empire at one time was very powerful and militant. They participated in many battles. What kind of battle is captured on the bas-reliefs, scientists have yet to study. Archaeologists plan to fully restore the Gate of God by the end of next year. It has a budget of more than $1 million and is supported by experts from the University of Mosul and the University of Pennsylvania in collaboration with the International Conflict Heritage Alliance. And now we will go from Iraq, together with archaeologists, to China, where we will see a find that fills an evolutionary gap. Earliest gibbon fossil. In southwest China's Yunnan province, archaeologists have found a fossil of a small monkey that pushes back the fossil record of gibbons by 7 to 8 million years. And I constantly talk about this. Literally one find of archaeologists can change a lot. Now Chinese and American archaeologists have the opportunity to fill an evolutionary gap in the history of small apes in East Asia. The fossil belongs to Yuanmopithecus shaoyan. This family of monkeys includes 20 gibbon species found in tropical and subtropical Asia. Archaeologists have previously managed to find only fragments of teeth or jaws of ancient animals. The oldest previously discovered fossilized remains of this gibbon are no more than 2 million years old, and you can already guess, the last find is very valuable. Archaeologist G discovered the facial bone of an infant, Yuanmopithecus shaoyan, 2 years old or younger. Fragments of the jaw were compared with the skulls of living gibbons, and this confirmed the authenticity of the find. After analyzing the teeth, scientists came to the conclusion that the 2-year-old ancient gibbon was approximately the size and weight of living adults, about 6 kilograms. Genetic studies indicate that the hylobathids diverged from the line leading to great apes and humans about 17-22 million years ago. But there is still a gap of 10 million years that needs to be filled with additional discoveries in the evolutionary history of the hylobathids, especially the gap between 2 and 6 million years ago, which was a critical period for the transition of ancient primates to modern primates. The study was published in the International Anthropological Journal of Human Evolution. In parallel with the ancient gibbons, Chinese scientists decided to re-examine dinosaur egg fossils and came to a serious conclusion. New possible reason for the extinction of dinosaurs. Scientists will never stop searching for the cause of the death of the ancient giants. The ancient world has always been associated with dinosaurs. These were the most mysterious creatures on our planet, and the extinction of such giant creatures is constantly of interest in the scientific community. Chinese scientists analyzed dinosaur egg fossils and found a steady decline in dinosaur diversity during the Cretaceous. This decline weakened the dinosaurs' ability to adapt to the ecological shocks caused by major natural disasters. The dinosaur population was directly dependent on the success of hatching from eggs. Looking ahead, I'll say in simple terms, if nothing had interfered with dinosaur eggs, then most likely dinosaurs would have survived to this day. There are two main theories for the extinction of giants: a huge asteroid and volcanic eruption in the Deccan Traps in India. In China, quite a lot of fossilized remains of dinosaurs and most importantly eggs have been discovered. Here, according to them, scientists are trying to find out the mass cause of extinction. After analyzing more than 1,000 samples of eggs and eggshells and fossilized bones, scientists determined that the massive population decline began 72 million years ago, while the last dinosaur died out 66 million years ago. This suggests that dinosaurs began to die out gradually long before their complete extinction. This is confirmed by fossils found in North America. According to studies there, it was also possible to determine that the population began to decline around the same period as in China. If everything has become more or less clear with dinosaurs, now I will tell you about the oldest carrier for children. 10,000-year-old baby carrier. When they try to prove to you in advertising that a baby carrier is the latest invention of mankind and you're obliged to buy it right now, then always remember this video. 5 years ago, in the Italian cave of Armaveron, archaeologists discovered the tomb of a baby, which is approximately 10,000 years old. For a long time, researchers from the University of Montreal studied the grave and the remains of a 2-month-old girl buried there. They concluded that the child was buried wearing a sling scarf adorned with beads and shells. The fabrics were practically not preserved, but even according to the grains that scientists managed to collect, they determined what kind of object it was. Although the child was only a couple of months old, the carrier had already become very dear to her. Most likely, the parents used the sling during their lifetime and not only as grave goods. As we know, people often put in the grave the most expensive and closest things that belonged to a person during his lifetime. That it was a sling and not a burial blanket is confirmed by the posture of the buried child. It can be seen that she was put in a grave one might turn her away from the heart. Richly decorated for that time, the sling indicates how dear the child was to her parents and how much they loved her. The scientists examined the shells and beads and found that they were very worn, which means that they were used long before the sling was made. Most likely they were jewelry that was inherited from grandparents. Perhaps these decorations were sewn to the sling as a talisman, and as we can now see, the amulet did not help the child. From Italy, we will move to explore the ancient settlements in Scotland. Ancient settlement in Scotland. One of the largest ancient settlements was discovered in Scotland in May this year. Atop Tappanot in Aberdeenshire, university archaeologists have found evidence that up to 4,000 people lived on the site between 1,700 and 1,400 years ago. Archaeologists conducted a series of studies using radiocarbon dating, drones, and laser technology, which showed that in ancient times they were building similar to houses. The Picts dominated part of Scotland for a long time, and the first mention of them was in late Roman writings as a problematic group of people. There are two main theories about the origin of the Picts. According to the first, the Picts are a Celtic tribe that separated early from the main mass of relatives. Therefore, they are so different from the same Gauls or Breton neighbors. According to the second, less popular, the Picts are the autochthonous population of Britain who came here in the early Bronze Age. In any case, scientists and historians know very little about the Picts in detail. Therefore, any find and mention of them is the most valuable information. The last found mention of them was 1,100 years ago. Archaeologists plan to better explore this site in the future in order to collect more valuable information. The next find is also from Scotland. The oldest cloth in Scotland. To be honest, the fabric from the Neolithic period practically doesn't survive. The study of textiles by scientists take place on the basis of prints on the ground or clay. So it was in this case. When in Ness of Brodga in Orkney, Scotland, an imprint was found that a cloth left when its pot was pressed against wet clay 5,000 years ago. Presumably, this fabric was used as a pottery garment during the manufacture of the pot. This is indicated by imprints inside the vessel. During the study of this object, archaeologists used the most modern methods of studying antiquities. The technique is called reflection transformation imaging, RTI, which combines multiple photographs of an object to create a highly detailed image that can reveal surface details not seen by normal viewing. The Ness of Brodgar team has been studying this ancient monumental complex of Neolithic buildings for 10 years. From Scotland, we will travel to South America to ride the Mayan train. Archaeological finds on the Maya train route. Discoveries on the Mayan train route do not stop. Authorities are building a Mayan tourist train that will travel through jungles and caves. During construction, archaeologists have already discovered many ancient buildings, artifacts, and objects from the Mayan era. And the most interesting thing is that tourists will now have the opportunity to observe the ancient Mayan world during their trip, and perhaps someone will be able to see something new there that has not been previously discovered by archaeologists and scientists. Two new archaeological discoveries have caused a lot of talk among archaeologists around the world. On the route along which the Mayan train will pass, a unique vessel and a network of interesting caves were discovered. It is still not known for sure whether the vessel was used for rituals, sacrifices, or for general use. It is very likely that these caves were used before the Spanish colonization of the region. Some objects are very reminiscent in style to the ones which were previously discovered many kilometers from this place. From the ancient Maya, we move on to the very ancient Chinese. Origin of Chinese civilization. Many people know that the Chinese civilization is considered one of the oldest that has survived to this day. But Chinese scientists are trying to go even deeper in their studies of antiquity, and for this, there are old prerequisites. Findings in the form of ancient skulls found on the territory of China help in studying the origin of Chinese civilization. One of these was the Yangtzean man, whose skull is over 1 million years old. The fossil is the third ancient human skull in the region, and it is the third skull of the Yangtzean man. The skull was found in Xi'an, Hubei province in central China, and belongs to Homo erectus. Even the dirt in which the skull was found has research value. It is already being worked on in the laboratory. Yangtzean man lived about 1 million years ago, which was a key moment in the evolution of Homo erectus. A link between predecessor and successor species such as Homo erectus pekinensis. The fossil is an important discovery for the study of Homo erectus evolution, origins, and development in China and the rest of East Asia. But once this Yangtzean man lived on our planet, he probably had a family and children. He fished and went hunting. He was fond of something. Perhaps he could sing, made different sounds, but he could not swim. He knew how to build houses from branches and clay, but he did not know how to cook food. He received emotions from his life as we do now, only lived a lot of years before we appeared. From ancient China, we will go to Rome to study ancient plumbing. Plumbing of ancient Rome. During the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, not only ancient Pompeii suffered, but also small cities located nearby. In our case, we will talk about a find discovered at the villa of Ariadne in Stabiae, a small decorated lead tank where water was supplied from an external water supply. Two pipes led from it, equipped with taps that could be closed if necessary. One pipe led to a fountain in the impluvium, a small pool pond in the central courtyard of the building around which Roman houses were built, the other inside the building. The villa was named after the famous fresco of Ariadne, found here. The area of the villa is 11,000 square meters, although less than half have been excavated. The faucets are of course bronze, not lead. After all, lead is very soft metal. Here it is clearly visible on a similar one. The tank is lead, the taps are bronze. Cold and hot water flow through them. Also in the villa, there is a hypocaust, a worm floor. Nowadays, not every apartment has hot water, but in ancient Rome it was not like that. And here is the plumbing in the house of the Veti in Pompeii. Well, how do you like the work of ancient Roman plumbers? As for me, taking into account the past millennia, it is quite high quality. And now you can see under your sink what your plumbing looks like. What about control weights? The city authorities placed similar scales so that any buyer could double-check the weight of the purchased product. There are 9 recesses on the scales and each has a reference exact volume. Merchants in those years found it harder to deceive their customers. Weight measurement took place as follows. The client poured grain into one of the recesses and then took out the cork at the bottom. Grain from below spilled back into the container. After that, the next untrusting buyer could take his measurements. And I will finish today's video with the dragon egg. Let's go to the USA. Dragon egg? Have you seen House of the Dragon yet? Write in the comments if you are a team black or green. Anyways, this is all fiction, but I'll tell you about the story that happened in real life. Whenever artifacts look mysterious, they try to attribute them to alien, mythical ancient civilizations, or to cryptids. You have noticed more than once that I myself sometimes believe in the plausibility of such findings. Perhaps this happens for the reason that people want to believe in something mythical, in sedition, in something that has never happened before, or maybe you want to find some kind of artifact that will tell the unknown truth about our past. Let's get closer to the find. This story happened back in 2020 in the USA. A resident of Arkansas was digging a hole for a pool in his area. In the ground, he found a mysterious object that has a flattened ovoid shape. Without hesitation, he immediately sent photos of his find to social networks. Each network user decided to express his theory of the origin of this object. Supporters of the existence of cryptids did not even doubt that in front of them was nothing more than a dragon egg, which flattened a little under the pressure of the earth. We have to admit that this strange thing, which has a length of just over half a meter, really looks like an egg or a petrified monster, although there were those who claimed that there was nothing mysterious in the find, calling it an ordinary geological formation. And it would seem to find out the truth, what kind of object or whose trace it is easier than ever. Send a team of archaeologists there for a detailed study. But the author of the photo acted unpredictably. He simply deleted all the photos without explaining anything. We can only speculate whether it was really a geological formation or certain organizations began to study this object and the owner of the photographs was asked to remove any mention of a dragon egg. In any case, I recommend that you subscribe to our channel and tell your friends about it. Your likes and comments help us in promotion and recognition. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone!